History is full of dramatic deaths, beheadings, poisonings, battlefield blunders, you name it. But which king really took the crown for the absolute worst way to go? Today we are diving into the messy finales of three royal figures who definitely didn't get to die of old age in their sleep. Grab your crown, sharpen your swords, and let's unravel the gruesome ends of Richard III of England, James I of Scotland, and Eric XIV of Sweden. But before we get to the real fun, let's be clear. There were plenty of other contenders, like Charles VIII, who met his end after slamming his head into a door frame so hard his life was literally cut short, or Richard II, who was left to starve to death in a room with nothing but his own despair. You've got your pick, but these three kings really took the worst death cake. Let's start with England's own Richard III, a man whose PR team apparently quit halfway through his reign. Shakespeare painted him as a hunchback supervillain who would kick puppies if it got him closer to the throne. Real historians are more nuanced. Yes, he was ruthless, but the whole baby murdering monster thing, a bit exaggerated probably. Now, Richard didn't exactly have the easiest path to the throne. In the 15th century, England was in the grip of the Wars of the Roses, a brutal, long-running conflict between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. The struggle for power wasn't exactly the polite, strategic maneuvering of modern politics. No, it was more like who can spill the most blood and then take the crown. Richard's older brother, King Edward IV, had defeated the Lancastrians and taken the throne. But by the time Richard III came into the picture, things were a little more complicated. Edward IV's death in 1483 left his young son, Edward V, as king. But Richard, as the Lord Protector, quickly decided the boy wasn't going to last long. He had his own claim to the throne, and through a series of politically suspicious moves, he had his nephew declared illegitimate and crowned himself King Richard III. His legitimacy, however, was shaky at best. Instead of ruling with full authority, Richard found himself constantly fighting to maintain his grip on power. By 1485, after 2 years of controversial rule, Richard faced the decisive Battle of Bosworth Field. This was it, his last chance to keep the throne. His rival, Henry Tudor, had raised an army and was marching to claim the crown. Richard took a bold gamble. He charged headlong into enemy lines, shouting for a horse. The horse didn't arrive, however, and soon Richard found himself abandoned by his own men. He was dragged off his steed and brutally hacked to pieces. It is said that Richard's body was stripped naked, paraded through the streets, and then tossed into a hastily dug grave. All in all, not a royal farewell. Archaeologists didn't exactly treat him better. In 2012, Richard's remains were discovered under a car park, because apparently even in death Richard couldn't catch a break. His skeleton showed multiple stab wounds, including one to the skull, that suggested someone had gone full Game of Thrones on him. Richard was savagely struck, then left in a grave that was more of an afterthought than a memorial. His death marked the final end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the rise of the Tudor monarchy. So next time you park your car, spare a thought for poor Richard III, who just wanted a horse and got a parking space instead. Next up, James I of Scotland. If Richard was unlucky, James had a lifetime subscription to bad luck. Born in 1394, James wasn't exactly destined for a smooth royal life. At the age of 12, he was kidnapped by the English during a trip to France and held hostage in London. While his family fumbled around trying to pay the ransom, James grew up in English captivity for 18 long years. He learned to be a king the hard way, by being stuck with one of the most brutal royal experiences imaginable. When James finally returned to Scotland in 1424, after the English had released him as a part of a peace deal, you'd think he'd got a warm welcome. But nope. It turns out being a king isn't as glamorous as it sounds, especially when you've been held hostage for most of your youth. By the time James took the throne, Scotland was a mess, full of corrupt nobles, power struggles, and a whole lot of bad blood. His reign would be an uphill battle against the Scottish nobility, who weren't exactly thrilled about the idea of a strong central monarchy. James was a reformer, a man with a vision to centralize power and curb the corruption of his nobles. But he was as popular as a tax collector at a feast. In 1473, a group of disgruntled nobles, tired of James's attempts to strip them of their power, decided that enough was enough. They hatched a plot, and in February of that year, it came to a bloody head. Picture this. It's a chilly evening in Edinburgh. James is holed up in the Blackfriars Monastery retreat. trying to relax after a long day of being a royal headache to his nobles. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the assassins, armed with swords, rush in. James tries to make a run for it, but there's one small problem. The only escape route is a sewer tunnel. And wouldn't you know it, the tunnel has been blocked off. By whose order, you ask? Oh, James' own. Why? Brace yourself for this one. The man had it sealed up because he kept losing tennis balls down there. Yes, tennis balls. Apparently, royal leisure activities take precedence over emergency escape plans. With no way out, James is cornered, defenseless, and at the mercy of his attackers. What follows is nothing short of a medieval nightmare. He's stabbed over 30 times in a brutal frenzy. He's a statue as king doing absolutely nothing to save him from the full force of their blades. Now let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity here. A monarch assassinated because he prioritized tennis equipment over a functional escape route. It's one of those moments in history that we gloss over with a straight face. But if someone put it in a novel or a TV show, we would roll our eyes and say, that's just lazy writing. Yet, here we are. Proof that reality sometimes outpaces even the most far-fetched fiction. And finally, we have Eric XIV of Sweden. Born in 1533, Eric was the eldest son of Gustav I of Sweden, the founder of the Swedish dynasty. At first, things looked promising for Eric. He was charismatic, intelligent, and ambitious. Everything you'd want in a monarch. But there's always a but, isn't there? Eric's reign took a sharp turn when he started suffering from a healthy dose of paranoia, possibly due to a mix of mental illness and the pressures of ruling. He began to suspect that those closest to him were plotting against him, including his brothers, and so he launched a series of purges. His most infamous act was the Sture murders of 1567, where he ordered the execution of several of his noble rivals. These killings were gruesome, and in the eyes of many, the final straw in Eric's increasingly erratic behavior. By 1568, Eric's own family had had enough. His brother John staged a coup, imprisoned him, and took the throne as King John III of Sweden. Eric was locked up in a series of castles, his mental state deteriorating as his power faded. Despite his fall from grace, Eric wasn't exactly going quietly. While in prison, he wrote dramatic letters demanding recognition as the rightful king. Think of it as medieval subtweeting. Still the king, just stuck in a castle. Eric's death came in 1577, after nearly a decade of imprisonment. And how did he go out? By poison. A bowl of pea soup laced with arsenic was brought to him. Eric ate it, and within hours the effect of the poison set in. And if you are wondering, arsenic poisoning isn't quick or pleasant. Imagine spending your last hours feeling like your insides are on fire. Bon appetit. Eric's death wasn't just the end of his reign. It symbolized the dangerous and chaotic politics of 16th century Sweden, where kings didn't just lose their crowns, they lost their lives in the most undignified ways possible. So if you were served soup in Sweden, maybe ask for the recipe first. You know, just to be safe. So there you have it, 3 kings who had the worst deaths imaginable. Richard III was hacked to pieces and buried under a car park, James I sealed his fate as he sealed off that escape route, and Eric XIV learned the hard way not to trust Swedish cuisine. What do you think? Which of these royal demises take the cake, or rather the poisoned soup? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this morbid stroll through history, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. After all, nothing brings people together like a good death story. Until the next time.